In the fractured veil of a blood moon, time bled into shadow, whispering secrets only the damned could hear. Vesha Klein gripped the noose's rough hemp, her wrists bound behind her like forgotten promises. At 31, she was no stranger to death's cold embrace. Contracts had carved her into a blade, an Omega assassin whose loyalty was bought with silver and sealed in blood. The pack's high council loomed before her in the moonlit clearing, their furred silhouettes etched against the snow-dusted pines of the northern wilds. Wind howled through the mountains, carrying the distant weave of wolves that mourned or mocked. She couldn't tell. Her breath fogged the air, sharp with the metallic tang of impending frost, as the Alpha Enforcer's voice boomed like thunder over stone. For treason against the Hale dynasty, Vesha Klein, you are cast out. May the goddess claim your soul before the cold does. Treason. The word tasted like ash on her tongue. She'd slit throats for the pack's glory, her lethal grace a shadow dance under lunar light. But one contract too many, a rival Alpha's whispered plea to end the tyrant's line, had unraveled her. They called it betrayal. She called it survival. Now, as the trapdoor groaned beneath her boots, regret wasn't for the kills, but for the emptiness they left. No mate, no kin, just the hollow echo of her own heartbeat against the wind's relentless bite. The drop came swift, the rope snapping taut. Pain exploded in her neck, a white-hot fire that blurred the world into smears of silver moonlight and crimson snow. She gasped, or tried to, her vision tunneling to the moon's bloated face above, pulsing, almost alive, as if the goddess herself wept blood. Then, a tear in reality. The air shimmered, cold warping into something hotter, deeper, like plunging into an unseen river. Time didn't stop. It unraveled, threads of past and present whipping around her like storm-lashed branches. She awoke to the scent of pine sap and wet earth, her body sprawled in a thicket far from the gallows. No rope, no counsel, no blood on the snow. Her hands, free, unmarked, pushed against loam that felt, younger, softer. The moon hung lower, its light filtering through leaves not yet dusted with winter's first kill. Vesha staggered to her feet, pulse thundering in her ears, the assassin's instincts screaming trap. But this was no illusion. The air hummed with a different rhythm. The stars aligned in patterns she half remembered from childhood tales. 31 winters, yet the world felt reborn. She touched her throat, smooth, unscarred. A hallucination? No, the chill seeping through her tattered leathers was too real, the distant roar of a river too vivid. Stumbling through the underbrush, she crested a ridge and froze. Below, in a valley cradled by jagged peaks, lay a village of thatched roofs and flickering torchlight, but not her village. The banners fluttering from wooden palisades bore the Hale crest, a snarling wolf under a crescent moon, but faded, less battle-worn, as if time had rolled back like a retreating tide. Decades, she realized with a gut-wrenching lurch. The execution was future's echo. This was the past's fragile dawn. How? The moon's blood? A curse from some forsaken contract? Vesha's mind raced, piecing fragments. The old seer she'd silenced years from now, muttering of lunar rifts and Omega blood as keys to forgotten doors. Whatever the why, survival demanded action. She was a ghost in time, armed only with skills honed in shadows. A child's cry pierced the night, sharp, terrified, slicing through the wind like a blade. Vesha's head snapped toward the sound, her body moving before thought could catch up. Down the slope she went, boots silent on the needle-strewn path, the cold air burning her lungs. In a moonlit glade beyond the village, hunters closed in. 3 betas, cloaked in gray furs, their spears glinting with torch-reflected fire. They circled a boy, no more than 7 winters old, his small frame huddled against a boulder. Golden hair matted with dirt, eyes wide with the blue of storm-tossed seas, he clutched a broken branch like a scepter. Prince Edrin Hale, Vesha knew instinctively, the pup destined for a throne, soaked in tyranny. In her time, he'd grown into a monster king, his rule a forge of iron and fear. But here, he was prey, fugitive perhaps from some early coup or jealous uncle's blade. The lead hunter laughed, low and guttural, his voice gravel over ice. The little princeling thinks he can run. The goddess favors the strong boy. And you're just meat for the wolves. Vesha's blood sang, an old fire igniting in her veins. Assassin or not, she couldn't watch a child bleed under that moon. Slipping into the shadows, she became wind and night, her form low and lethal. The first hunter fell without a sound. Her dagger, retrieved from her boot in the chaos of awakening, sliding true between ribs. Warm blood sprayed the snow, steaming in the frigid air, its coppery scent mingling with pine and fear. The second turned, spear raised, but Vesha was already upon him, her knee driving into his gut, the blade following to silence his gasp. The third lunged, roaring, but she twisted, using his momentum to hurl him into the underbrush. A crack of bone, then stillness. The glade fell quiet, save for the boy's ragged breaths and the wind's mournful sigh. She approached slowly, sheathing the dagger slick with crimson. The Prince Edrin stared up at her, terror yielding to wary awe. His eyes, so like the adult kings she'd glimpsed in visions of doom, held no cruelty yet, only the raw spark of survival. Who are you?" he whispered, voice trembling like leaves in the breeze. Vesha knelt, the cold earth biting through her leathers, and extended a hand stained with the blood of his would-be killers. "Someone the moon sent," she said softly, her voice a rare tenderness amid the gore. "And tonight, little one, I'm your shadow." As she pulled him close, his small body shaking against hers, Vesha felt the paradox coil in her chest, a mother's instinct blooming in the assassin's heart. The moon watched, impassive, its light gilding the bloodied snow like a promise or a warning. Time had gifted her this chance. But at what cost? To raise a tyrant as her own, to rewrite fate with hands once meant for murder. The wind carried a distant weave, echoing her resolve. Redemption or ruin, the path began here, under the unblinking eye of the goddess. The wind clawed at their backs like an unforgiving specter, urging Vesha and the boy deeper into the shadowed folds of the mountain pass. Edrin's small hand clutched hers, sticky with the remnants of fear sweat and the earthy chill of night, his breaths coming in shallow bursts that mirrored the ragged rhythm of her own. She moved with the precision of a predator evading the hunt, her senses attuned to every snap of twig beneath the frost-kissed undergrowth, every whisper of pine needles surrendering to the breeze. The glade's bloodied snow lay behind them now, a crimson testament swallowed by darkness, but its metallic echo lingered in her nostrils, a reminder that mercy had its price. 31 years of solitude as an Omega Blade had taught her to trust no one, least of all the fragile ties of blood or fate. Yet here she was, tethered to this child whose future eyes would one day command empires built on bone. Prince Edrin Hale, the name alone stirred the ashes of her old contracts, visions of a grown king whose decrees had painted the northern Pax in rivers of red. She glanced down at him, his golden curls plastered to a forehead pale as moonlit marble, those storm-blue eyes flickering with a mix of defiance and dread. Instinct pulled at her core, an Omega's ancient call to nurture, but she shoved it down, rationalizing it as mere survival's ploy. He was a means to an end, a pawn in time's cruel game, not a son to claim. "Why did you save me?" His voice cut through the silence, soft but edged with the steel of royalty even at 7 winters. They paused at the mouth of a narrow ravine where the river's roar drowned the distant howls that might belong to pursuers or wild kin. Vesha scanned the ridgeline, her free hand hovering near the dagger at her belt, its hilt still warm from use. "Because the moon willed it," she murmured, the words tasting half-true on her tongue. The lunar disk hung heavy overhead, its silver glow fracturing on the water's surface like shattered promises. In her time, that same moon had wept blood during her execution, unraveling the threads of her life. Now it watched impassively, as if mocking the assassin-turned-guardian. She knelt to his level, the cold stone biting into her knees through leather, and met his gaze. Fear danced there, but so did curiosity, a spark that could ignite into the tyrant's flame, or perhaps something softer if she dared to stoke it differently. Edrin's lower lip trembled, but he squared his narrow shoulders, mimicking the alphas he'd no doubt observed in the Hale Court's shadowed halls. "The hunters. They said my father sent them. That I'm cursed, marked by the goddess for weakness." His fingers tightened on hers, a child's plea wrapped in princely pride. Vesha's chest tightened, not with pity, but with the sharp pang of recognition. She'd been marked once, too, Omega-born, deemed unfit for more than silent kills. The Pack's games of power had forged her isolation, just as they now hunted this pup for reasons whispered in her future memories. A jealous uncle's ambition, a prophecy of a weak heir dooming the dynasty. "You're no curse," she said, her voice low, weaving through the wind's lament. "The goddess doesn't mark the weak, she tests the unseen. Lies or truths?" She couldn't yet discern, but the words anchored him, his body leaning into hers as if scenting the faint omega warmth beneath her assassin's armor. The connection stirred unbidden, an instinctive pull, like the tide to the moon, drawing her to shield what fate had destined for ruin. But denial coiled tight in her gut. This was no fairy tale of maternal bonds. She was Vesha Klein, killer of kings, not some hearth-bound mother rewriting stars. Curiosity warred with fear. What if saving him now only birthed the monster stronger? A low growl echoed from the tree line, snapping her from reverie. Shadows shifted, more hunters, or wolves drawn by the scent of spilled blood. Vesha hauled Edrin behind a cluster of boulders, her body a barrier against the night. The air thickened with the musk of fur and aggression, the river's spray mingling with the first flakes of snow that dusted their forms like forgotten blessings. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling silence, but the boy's eyes widened, not in terror, but in a dawning trust that pierced her defenses. The growl grew nearer, paws crunching over gravel. Vesha's mind raced through lethal calculations, strike first, vanish into the mist. But Edrin's hand in hers grounded her, a tether she hadn't sought. As the beast emerged, a lone wolf with eyes like molten silver, it paused, sniffing the air. Not a hunter's hound, but a wild sentinel, its gaze locking on the child before sliding to her. The moon's light bathed them all, turning fur to frost and bloodstains to rust. The wolf tilted its head, as if recognizing the anomaly she carried. Time's fracture, omega blood laced with temporal fire. It did not attack. Instead, it let out a single resonant howl that vibrated through the stone, then melted back into the shadows. Vesha exhaled, the tension ebbing like receding waters, but the encounter lingered. A sign, a warning? Edrin tugged at her sleeve, his voice a whisper laced with awe. It knew you, like the stories of the goddess's pathfinders who walk between moons. Pathfinders. The word echoed from her past, old lore of omegas who bent fate's weave. Vesha's skills felt distant now, the assassin's edge blunted by this new pull, replaced by something gentler, more perilous. The power to alter roots before the tree grew twisted. She rose, pulling him onward into the ravine's embrace, the snow falling thicker, veiling their tracks. The connection between them hummed, instinctive and denied, born of fear's forge and curiosity's flame. But as the wind carried the wolf's fading oeuvre, Vesha wondered if the moon had truly sent a savior, or a paradox to unravel them both. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The ravine's jagged walls closed around them like the goddess's unyielding fingers, channeling the wind into a ceaseless dirge that whipped snow into stinging veils. Vesha pressed onward, Edrin's small form half hidden in the folds of her cloak, his weight a novel anchor against the chill that seeped deeper than bone. Hours blurred into a relentless march, the river's thunder masking their steps, but exhaustion gnawed at her edges, the assassin's endurance fraying under this uncharted burden. She scanned the looming shadows for sanctuary, her instincts mapping escape routes even as a foreign warmth bloomed in her chest, urging her to weave not just survival, but something resembling home. Dawn's first gray light clawed over the peaks when they stumbled upon the cave, a yawning maw in the cliffside, veiled by icicle-draped ferns and the faint steam of hidden hot springs. Vesha hesitated at the threshold, nostrils flaring at the mineral tang of sulfur and damp stone, mingled with the faint musk of past occupants, bears perhaps, or nomadic wolves seeking winter's mercy. It would do. She guided Edrin inside, the boy's steps faltering as the darkness swallowed them, broken only by the moon's dying gleam filtering through cracks above. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice echoing softly off walls etched with ancient claw marks, symbols of forgotten packs that spoke of endurance amid isolation. They kindled a fire from scavenged tinder, dry moss and twisted roots, its flames leaping to life with a hungry crackle, casting flickering gold across the cavern's rough-hewn sanctuary. Edrin huddled near the warmth, his blue eyes reflecting the dance of embers like storm clouds lit from within. Vesha watched him from across the blaze, her body coiled for threat, dagger within reach. The boy peeled off his muddied tunic, revealing bruises blooming like dark petals on pale skin, marks of rough hands or harder falls. Her gaze lingered, a pang twisting low in her gut, not the calculated pity of a killer assessing weakness, but something rawer, an Omega's echo stirring from years of suppression. As the fire's heat thawed their limbs, Edrin's curiosity pierced the silence. "You fight like the shadows in Father's tales," he said, poking at the flames with a stick, sparks rising like fleeting stars. "But you're different, not like the alphas who roar and command." His words hung in the smoky air, probing the barriers she'd built around her fractured self. Vesha fed another branch to the fire, the wood hissing as sap wept into the heat. In her time, she'd been a specter, unseen and unloved, her kills a silent rejection of the pack's hierarchies. Now, this child, fated for a crown of thorns, saw her not as blade, but enigma. Before she could deflect, the cave mouth darkened. A snarl ripped through the morning mist, followed by the thud of paws on stone. Vesha surged to her feet, shoving Edrin behind her, the dagger flashing in her grip. 3 figures emerged from the veil, betas from the hail fringes, their furs matted with travel grime, eyes gleaming with the feral glint of bounty hunters. The leader, a scarred brute with a notched ear, bared teeth yellowed by chew root. "The princeling's scent led us here, witch," he growled, spear leveled, its tip catching the firelight in a bloody sheen. "Uncle Thorn sends his regards. The boy's weakness ends today. Hand him over, and maybe the goddess spares your hide." Vesha's blood ignited, the old lethal rhythm surging through her veins like liquid fire. But as she stepped forward, a strange lethargy tugged at her limbs, the assassin's precision dulling, as if time's rift had siphoned her edge, replacing it with a subtler force, one that hummed in her core like the moon's pull on tides. No matter. She lunged, dagger arcing toward the leader's throat, but he parried with brutal force, the clash ringing like struck iron. Pain flared in her shoulder as his spear grazed leather, drawing a thin line of crimson that welled warm against the cold. Edrin's cry shattered the fray, a high, defiant keen that morphed into a growl far too potent for his size. The boy scrambled forward, not fleeing but charging, his small fists balled, eyes blazing with an inherited fury. One beta lunged at him, but Vesha twisted, tackling the attacker mid-stride, her body slamming him into the cavern wall with a crack of bone. Blood sprayed, hot and coppery, spattering the fire and turning flames to hissing red. The second beta circled, feinting with claws extended, but Edrin darted in low, grabbing a loose stone and hurling it with surprising force. It struck true, splitting the hunter's brow, blood sheeting down his face in rivulets that mirrored the cave's dripping stalactites. In the chaos, empathy forged its first link. Vesha glimpsed it in Edrin's face, not just survival's snarl, but a fierce protectiveness mirroring her own. He wasn't cowering. He fought for her, this stranger who'd become his shield. The realization struck deeper than any blade, cracking the walls around her heart. As the leader roared and charged, Vesha met him head-on, her fading skills bolstered by this new bond. She sidestepped, driving her elbow into his windpipe, then plunged the dagger home. He crumpled, gurgling, the light fading from his eyes like embers drowned in snow. The last beta fled into the mist, his howls swallowed by the wind, but victory tasted bittersweet. Vesha sank to her knees beside the fire, breath ragged, blood, hers and theirs, mingling on the stone floor in a sacred pattern. Edrin rushed to her, pressing a trembling hand to her wounded shoulder, his touch tentative yet insistent. You saved me again," he murmured, voice thick with unshed tears, the royal mask slipping to reveal a child's raw need. For the first time, Vesha didn't pull away. She covered his hand with hers, feeling the pulse of connection thrumming between them. Instinctive, undeniable, transforming fear into a fragile trust. The cave's warmth enveloped them, the fire's glow weaving shadows that danced like lunar spirits. Outside, snow fell in earnest, blanketing the world in white silence. But within, a bond took root, empathy's quiet alchemy turning guardian, and warred into something perilously close to kin. Vesha's lethal past receded further, supplanted by this emergent power, not to kill, but to guide paths untrodden. Yet as Edrin leaned against her, his breathing evening into sleep's rhythm, doubt coiled in her chest. Protecting him from Thorn's shadows was one war, shielding him from his own destined darkness another. The moon, now hidden by clouds, offered no answers, only the weight of choices yet to come, mercy's crown or fate's unyielding chain. The years wove through the northern wilds like threads of frost-laced silk, binding Vesha to the boy she'd claimed from time's jagged maw. Caves gave way to hidden hollows, then to a modest cabin forged from pine and stone in a valley veiled by perpetual mist, far from the Hale Court's grasping shadows. Edrin grew under her watchful gaze, his golden curls darkening to burnished wheat, his frame stretching into the lean promise of an alpha's strength. At 31 upon her arrival, Vesha felt the seasons etch subtle lines into her skin. Crow's feet from squinting at horizons, hands calloused not just from blades but from tilling earth and mending wounds. Her assassin's edge had dulled to a whisper, supplanted by this emergent rhythm, teaching him the forest's secrets, the moon's phases as guides to inner tempests, and the quiet art of mercy over might. Yet doubt lingered like smoke from a dying fire, coiling in her nights. She watched Edrin spar with shadows, his storm-blue eyes flashing with a fire that echoed his father's legacy, and the tyrant's shadow she knew loomed in futures unwritten. "Strength isn't in the kill, pup," she'd murmur during their evenings by the hearth, flames casting elongated silhouettes on walls scarred by claw and time. "It's in choosing when to sheath the fang." He'd nod, but she saw the war within him, the pull of royal blood against the gentleness she nurtured, like a river carving stone, yet yearning for the sea. The moon, ever her silent witness, waxed and waned, its silver light spilling through the cabin's slatted window, gilding a small talisman she wore, a crescent pendant forged from the glade's bloodied snow, melted and recast as a symbol of their improbable bond. One autumn eve, as leaves bled crimson into the wind-swept earth, the hidden gift stirred. Edrin, now 17 winters strong, returned from a hunt with a limp, his arm gashed by a boar's tusk. Blood soaked his tunic, the metallic scent thick as he collapsed by the fire, jaw clenched against the pain. Vesha knelt beside him, her hands, once instruments of swift death, now trembling with an unfamiliar surge. "Hold still," she commanded, but as her fingers pressed the wound, a warmth bloomed from her core, not heat but light, ethereal as moonlight on fresh snow. The air hummed, charged with the scent of ozone and wild herbs, and before her eyes the gash knit itself, flesh weaving like threads pulled by invisible hands. Edrin's breath hitched, his eyes widening not in fear but revelation. "Mother, what sorcery is this?" The word, mother, had slipped from him years ago, unbidden during a fevered night when storms raged and he clung to her like a lifeline. She'd accepted it then, as she did now, though it twisted the paradox deeper. Savior, guardian, yet harbinger of a fate she sought to unmake. Vesha pulled back, staring at her palms, unmarked save for the faint glow fading like embers. The assassin's skills had vanished entirely in these years, replaced by this. A pathfinder's touch, bending time's echoes to heal, to alter the roots of destiny before thorns could bloom. "It's no sorcery," she whispered, voice raw as the wind outside, carrying the distant uive of a pack on the prowl. "It's the goddess's weave, mended through Omega blood. I've walked between moons, Edrin, seen the rivers of red your throne might spill. The confessions spilled unbidden, the cave's long-ago bond evolving into this vulnerable truth." He sat up, the wound now a pale scar mirroring her own hidden marks, his gaze searching her face as if seeing her anew, not as the shadow who saved him, but as the anomaly threading through his life. The fire crackled, spitting sparks that danced like lunar spirits, illuminating the crescent pendant at her throat. Edrin reached out, fingers brushing it, and in that touch, visions flickered, not hers alone, but shared, flashes of a blood moon execution, a noose's bite, the unraveling of time. His breath caught, recognition dawning like dawn over iced peaks. You're from after." The seers spoke of a woman who defies the stars, an Omega who births kings from Mercy's forge. At 33 in the timeline she'd fled. He was the tyrant. Here, at 17, he was clay in her hands, perceiving her as the key, the pathfinder whose arrival had already shifted whispers in the wind, drawing Thorn's spies closer, the court's intrigues coiling like vipers in the mist. Vesha's heart thundered, the weight of it visceral, the cold stone floor pressing her knees, the hearth smoke stinging her eyes. The boys, her sons, scent of pine and growing alpha, mingling with her own fading lethality. This power wasn't conquest, it was revelation, demanding she confront the moral chasm, preserve the history that birthed her exile, or shatter it, rewriting the pack's fate with compassion's blade. Edrin's hand closed over hers, empathy's bond now laced with awe, his voice a low rumble echoing the river's depth. "If you're the key, then teach me to turn it right, not for power, but for the packs that bleed under false crowns." Outside, snow began to fall, silent flakes veiling the world in white judgment, while the moon emerged, full and unforgiving, casting its glow through the window like a divine gaze. Vesha felt the pull, instinctive, resisted no longer, as the gift settled in her veins, a quiet fire promising renascimento amid the tragedy. But as Edrin's eyes held hers, mirroring the storm within, she sensed the trial looming, the past's ghosts converging, forcing choices that could crown mercy or unleash blood anew. The wind howled, carrying the echo of youths that mourned destinies in flux, and in that moment, under the lunar eye, Vesha knew her exile had forged not just a mother, but a weaver of fates. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the storm ones tore through the valley like the goddess's vengeful breath, hurling snow in blinding sheets that cloaked the cabin in a shroud of white fury. Vesha stood at the threshold, the crescent pendant heavy against her chest, its silver edge warmed by the fire's dying embers within. 10 years had sculpted her from assassin to anchor, her body now a map of quiet endurance, shoulders broadened by labor, eyes deepened by nights spent unraveling Edrin's inner tempests. At 41, the time rift's gift pulsed stronger. A subtle current in her veins that whispered of paths diverged, fates mended before they fractured. But tonight, under the moon's bloated gaze, the past clawed back, demanding reckoning. Edrin, 17 and towering with the raw power of an alpha on the cusp, paced the room behind her, his storm-blue eyes shadowed by the torchlight flickering on the walls. The healing from his boar wound had sealed more than flesh. It had ignited questions that burned brighter than the hearth. "Thorn's spies circle closer," he growled, voice a low thunder echoing the gale outside. "The court's whispers reach even here, tales of a hidden prince raised by a moon-touched Omega. They come for blood, for the throne I was never meant to claim without it." His hand flexed at his side, claws half extended, the tyrant's legacy warring with the mercy she'd instilled. Vesha felt it in him, that instinctive pull toward dominance, yet tempered now by her touch, a fragile alloy of compassion and crown. She turned, meeting his gaze, the wind's howl mingling with the distant uives of approaching packs, their calls laced with betrayal's bitter edge. Uncle Thorn, the traitor whose ambition had hunted the boy and now stalked the man, led the fray. In her original timeline, he'd poisoned the Hail Line, paving Edrin's rise to tyranny. Here, Vesha's arrival had twisted the weave, drawing the viper's fangs earlier. Scouts had spotted their cabin days ago, the mist no longer veil enough. Freedom or love? The choice loomed. Visceral as the cold seeping through cracks, her heart a drumbeat against the paradox. To flee with him, preserving their bond in exile, or face the pack, risking all for a redemption that might demand her erasure from his life. The door shuddered under a battering ram's blow, splintering inward with a crack like breaking bone. Snow billowed in, carrying the metallic reek of drawn steel and furred aggression. Thorn's betas surged first, 6 shadows in steel-gray cloaks, axes gleaming under the moon's intrusion, their breaths fogging the air like specters. Behind them loomed the uncle himself, broad and scarred, his alpha presence a suffocating musk that clashed with the cabin's scent of pine and healing herbs. At 50 winters, Thorn's eyes burned with fanatic zeal, the rival alpha's ambition etched in every line of his snarling face. "Nephew," he rumbled, voice gravel over frost. "You've hidden long enough in this witch's den. The goddess demands a strong Hail on the throne, not some pup suckled on weakness." Edrin stepped forward, body coiling like a spring, but Vesha's hand on his arm halted him, her touch a conduit for the Pathfinder's calm, a subtle glow that eased the fury in his veins. "This ends not with blades," she said, her voice steady as the river's undercurrent, though fear gnawed at her core, sharp as the wind's bite. The betas fanned out, encircling the hearth, their boots crunching embers into ash, the fire's warmth yielding to the intruder's chill. Thorn's laugh barked like a whip, his gaze raking her form. "The anomaly. The seers foretold you, an Omega ghost from beyond the veil, twisting time's river. But blood calls to blood, woman. Hand over the boy, or join the snow in red." The confrontation ignited, not in chaos, but in layers of moral fire. A beta lunged at Edrin, axe swinging in an arc that sang through the air. But the young alpha parried with a scavenged poker, the clash ringing like a funeral bell. Vesha moved instinctively, her faded lethality reborn in defense, not to kill, but to shield. She twisted between them, her palm pressing the attacker's chest. The Pathfinder's gift flared, a ripple of lunar light that froze him mid-stride, visions of his own betrayals flooding his mind. Thorn's bribes, the hunts for power. He staggered back, eyes wide with dawning horror, weapon clattering to the floor. "Mercy," she whispered, the word a blade of its own, cutting through the rage. Thorn roared, charging with claws extended, his form a blur of steel and spite. Edrin met him, father against son in blood if not bond, their grapple spilling into the snow beyond the threshold. Fists flew, blood spraying in crimson arcs that steamed against the white, the uncle's snarls mingling with the storm's fury. Vesha followed, the cold enveloping her like a lover's cruel embrace, her pendant swinging wild as she intervened. "Enough!" Her cry pierced the fray, hands outstretched. The gift surged, weaving threads of revelation. Thorn halted, pinned not by force, but by the onslaught of truths. Flashes of the timeline she'd fled, his schemes birthing a tyrant's reign, pacts shattered under iron rule. He gasped, dropping to his knees in the drifts, the alpha's pride crumbling like hoarfrost. What have you done?" Vesha knelt before him, the snow soaking her leathers, her breath visible in the lunar glow. The betas wavered, loyalty fracturing under the shared visions, a choice between war's endless cycle and forgiveness's uncertain dawn. Edrin stood over Thorn, chest heaving, blood trickling from a gash on his brow, his eyes mirroring hers in their storm, holding not vengeance, but a question. Kill him, and we become the monsters he fears, or pardon, and rewrite the pack's chains. The wind fell silent, weaves fading into the night, leaving only the crackle of settling snow and the thud of hearts. Vesha's soul tore. Love for this son of time bound her to protection, yet freedom demanded she release him to his throne, risking the darkness she'd glimpsed. Forgiveness or war? The moon watched, its light pooling in Thorn's eyes like molten silver, demanding her verdict. In that frozen instant, the Pathfinder's power hummed, offering not escape, but the weight of true strength, to choose compassion amid the blood, or let fate's river run red once more. The air thickened with the scent of pine and possibility, her decision a precipice under the goddess's unblinking stare, where redemption hung by a thread as fragile as the falling flakes. The snow's relentless descent wove a tapestry of silence around them, each flake a fragile decree from the moon's indifferent throne. Vesha's knees sank deeper into the drift, the cold a numb embrace that mirrored the frost creeping through her veins. Thorn knelt before her, his alpha frame bowed not by chains, but by the visions she'd unleashed, echoes of tyrannies unborn, packs fractured under the weight of his own greed. His eyes, once steel-hard, now shimmered with fractured light, reflecting the lunar glow that pooled like spilled mercury on the blood-flecked white. Edrin loomed at her side, his breath ragged plumes in the frozen air, the gash on his brow weeping crimson trails that traced the contours of his face like fate's reluctant signature. The betas encircled them, weapons lowered but grips tight, their loyalty a fraying thread caught in the wind's mournful sigh. Vesha felt the Pathfinder's power ebbing from her palms, a warm tide receding to leave her exposed, raw, as if the gift had stripped away the last veils of her assassin's armor. Love or freedom? The paradox clawed at her core, visceral as the metallic tang of blood mingling with pine sap on the gale. To forgive Thorn meant binding Edrin to a throne tainted by Mercy's gamble, a union that could heal the Hale legacy or shatter it anew. To unleash war would sever their bond, sacrificing the sun she'd forged from time's wreckage to preserve her own unmoored existence. Her heart thundered, a solitary drum against the storm's hush, the crescent pendant pulsing hot against her skin like a second heartbeat. "Speak your choice, anomaly," Thorn rasped, his voice cracked ice, the rival's pride warring with the revelations gnawing at his soul. He lifted his head, gaze locking on hers. Not with hatred, but a desperate plea. The first crack in the tyrant's mold she'd glimpsed in futures long evaded. Vesha's mind raced through the years. The child's trusting hand in hers, the youth's fire tempered by hearthside lessons, the man's emerging strength laced with compassion's quiet forge. She'd come as a blade, become a mother, and now stood at the precipice where sacrifice demanded her unraveling. The moon hung full above, its silver gaze piercing the clouds like a divine interrogation, eaves rising distant and harmonious, as if the wild kin sensed the weave's turning point. Idrin's hand found her shoulder, firm yet trembling, his touch a conduit for the bond that had bloomed from fear's ashes. "Mother," he murmured, the word a sacred anchor in the chaos. "If mercy crowns us, let it be ours to wear, not his." But doubt shadowed his storm-blue eyes, the alpha's instinct pulling toward vengeance's swift release, a single strike to end the uncle's threat, freeing the path to the throne unbloodied by kinslaying. Vesha rose slowly, the snow shedding from her leathers like shed regrets, her body a bridge between the fallen and the rising. The wind stilled, as if the goddess held her breath, the air thick with the scent of frost-kissed earth and the faint herbal echo of her healing gift. She extended a hand to Thorn, not in strike but offering, the Pathfinder's light flickering once more at her fingertips, subtle, like dawn's first blush on iced peaks. "Rise," she commanded, her voice a low cadence weaving through the tension, steady as the river's underflow beneath the storm. "Not as traitor, but as witness. The packs bleed not for one man's crown, but for the chains we all forge in blindness." Thorn hesitated, claws retracting with a soft click, his broad form unfolding like a banner caught in easing winds. The betas shifted, murmurs rippling like whispers through ancient pines, their aggression yielding to the shared visions. A hail rain not of iron, but alliance, mercy as the blade that carved peace from war's endless grind. As Thorn clasped her hand, rough and calloused, a jolt passed between them, not violence, but union's spark. The gift surged, mending not flesh, but fractures deeper, flashes of redemption for him. Paths diverged where his ambition bent toward guardianship rather than conquest. He staggered, exhaling a guttural sound midway between growl and sob, the alpha's musk softening to something vulnerable, human amid the furred wilds. Edrin watched, his chest rising and falling in sync with hers, the choice's weight lifting like fog burned by lunar fire. Forgiveness bloomed, not as weakness, but rebirth, a cure woven from the threads of their improbable kin, binding uncle, nephew, and the time-lost Omega in a fragile pact. Yet as Thorn stood, nodding to his betas who sheathed their axes with reluctant grace, Vesha felt the cost etch into her bones. The Pathfinder's power dimmed further, its light retreating as if the act of healing fates demanded her own fading from the weave. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, herself dissolving into mist, a ghost reclaimed by the rift that birthed her here, her presence the sacrifice to seal this new dawn. Love had won, but at freedom's edge, Edrin's throne secured, the pack's destiny rewritten in compassion's ink rather than blood's flood. She turned to her son, cupping his face marred by the fray, the warmth of his skin a fleeting balm against the chill seeping deeper. "You'll rule not as tyrant, but redeemer," she whispered, throat tight with the unsaid farewell, the wind carrying her words like a prophecy etched in snow. Edrin's eyes searched hers, recognition dawning of the price she'd pay, the mother's quiet erasure to ensure his light endured. The moon dipped lower, casting elongated shadows that danced like spirits sealing oaths, the Uivs swelling into a chorus of affirmation. In that suspended breath, Renacimento took hold. Union forged in the crucible of choice, where sacrifice cured the wounds of time, and mercy crowned the fallen not in glory, but in enduring flame. But as the storm abated, revealing stars like scattered diamonds on velvet night, a deeper tremor stirred in Vesha's core, the rift whispering its claim, pulling at the edges of her form. The goddess's gift had granted this miracle, yet demanded balance, her heart's redemption, or the unraveling of all she'd built. Edrin sensed it, his grip tightening, the air humming with unspoken dread. Under the lunar vigil, the final thread hung taut, poised between eternal bond and time's inexorable tide. The rift's whisper grew to a roar in Vesha's blood, a tidal pull that tugged at the edges of her form like threads unraveling from a grand, ancient tapestry. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, melting into salt tracks on her cheeks as she held Edrin's gaze. The storm's fury, now a hushed aftermath, leaving the valley bathed in the moon's austere silver. Thorn and his betas stood sentinel at a distance, their forms etched against the pines like statues forged in reluctant truce, the air heavy with the scent of churned earth and cooling blood. The crescent pendant at her throat burned, not with fire, but with the inexorable light of closure, its glow sinking to the pulse of her fading essence, the Pathfinder's gift exacting its toll for the weave she'd mended. Edrin's hands framed her face, calloused thumbs tracing the lines time and trial had carved, his storm-blue eyes a tempest of denial and dawning sorrow. At 27 now, in this altered flow, he embodied the king she'd birthed from Mercy's forge, broad-shouldered, furred cloak dusted with snow, the alpha's musk laced with the pine of their shared hearth. Yet vulnerability cracked his regal mask, a raw echo of the boy she'd pulled from Hunter's shadows. "No," he growled, low and fierce, the word vibrating through her like the earth's deep rumble. "You don't fade. Not after binding us from ruin." His claws pricked her skin, not in threat, but desperation, drawing pinpricks of crimson that welled like rubies on snow, the metallic tang sharp against the frost-kissed wind. Vesha's body trembled, the cold no longer mere chill, but dissolution, limbs growing translucent at the edges, as if the moon reclaimed its loned light. The paradox had haunted her since the gallows' snap. To rewrite the pack's fate meant severing the anomaly that enabled it. Her presence the fracture time could not abide. Love had bloomed, resisted, rationalized through years of lessons by firelight, until acceptance sealed it as the truest redemption, not a reward, but a proof etched in sacrifice. "I was never meant to stay," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread weaving through the silence, breath fogging between them like a final vow. The Ueves rose again, a choral lament from the wilds, harmonizing with the river's distant thunder, as if the goddess mourned the weaver's departure. Thorn stepped forward, his scarred bulk a shadow in the lunar wash, eyes no longer venomous but tempered by the visions she'd gifted, paths of alliance over conquest, packs united under a crown of compassion. "You've cured what my ambition poisoned," he rumbled, voice gravel softened by awe, extending a hand not in dominance but alliance. The betas murmured assent, their weapons grounded, loyalty shifting like snow settling into new contours. Edrin's grip tightened, pulling her close, his forehead pressing to hers, the heat of his skin a fleeting anchor against the void's encroachment. In that press, memories cascaded, the glade's bloodied rescue, the cave's defiant spark, the cabin's quiet healings, each a stone in the bridge from assassin to mother, from exile to architect of rebirth. The choice crystallized, moral and visceral. Preserve the history that birthed her loneliness, or embrace the break, her erasure the union that bound Edrin's reign to Mercy's flame. Vesha chose the latter, her hands rising to cup his cheeks, the Pathfinder's light surging one final time, not to heal flesh, but to imprint her essence, a spiritual tether woven into his bloodline. Warmth bloomed between them, ethereal as moonlight on water, flooding him with echoes of her trials, the nooses bite, the rifts whirl, the quiet ferocity of an Omega's unyielding heart. "Rule with the strength I taught," she whispered, tears freezing on her lashes, the wind carrying her words like sacred ash. "Not power's chain, but compassion's crown. The pack's fate is yours now, rewritten in light, not blood." Edrin's roar tore from his throat, a primal keening that shook the snow from branches, his body shuddering as the transfer took hold. The light enveloped them, silver veils swirling like spirits in revel, the pendant's glow peaking before shattering into motes that dissolved into the night. Vesha felt the unraveling accelerate, her form thinning to mist, the cold yielding to an infinite warmth, as if stepping into the moon's own embrace. Yet in the dissolution, union bloomed eternal, her gift embedded in him, a latent pathfinder's spark to guide future crossroads, ensuring the Hale legacy flowered in redemption rather than thorns. Thorn bowed his head, the rival turned ally, while the betas howled in unison, a vow of fealty under the stars. As her vision blurred to silver haze, Edrin's face remained sharp, the king's eyes alight with resolved fire, his hand reaching through the fading veil. "Mother," he breathed, the word a bridge across the rift. "You are the moon in our blood." The wind sighed, carrying her last exhale, the snow accepting her form like a lover's gentle fall. Time sealed the fracture with a soft hum, the valley emerging reborn. Packs converging not in war, but convergence. The throne awaiting a redeemer forged from sacrifice's pure alloy. In the hush that followed, Edrin stood tall, the crescent's shards glinting in his palm like captured stars, a symbol of the cure that had demanded all. The moon waned toward dawn, its light a benediction on the bloodless snow, whispering of destinies mended, loves transcended, and rebirths eternal under the goddess's watchful gaze. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.